not leaving now, are you?
Well,
I'm not going to vamp till ready, no. Wait, you didn't define first. Oh, I see. Okay, all right then. All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Lisette Coley. I'm Vice President of Parapsychology Foundation. And on behalf of the Foundation and our Board of Trustees, I welcome you all here this evening. Now, we're seated most intimately, and probably a bit too intimately, within the Eileen J. Garrett Research Library, named for our founder, Eileen Garrett. We are very proud of our continued existence and the body of work that we have amassed since our inception in 1951. In the next few years, we'll be celebrating our milestone 50th anniversary. And in that context, we've been trying to think up ways to retool and reposition the Foundation for the better worth of our colleagues immersed in the study of parapsychology and related disciplines, as well as the public at large. Let's see, what else did I want to tell you? Well, we of course do seek to maintain our long-standing programs. Many of you are familiar with these programs. There's our grant program, publishing program, scholarships, international conferences, and of course the maintenance and growth of this fine research library under the very able direction of Dr. Joanne McMahon. Let's see now, what else did I want to tell you? My big moment of glory here. Well, as we go along and have these new activities, we'll keep you posted, and we urge you to use the facility and welcome you to use the facility, because we feel from time to time we're somewhat of a wasted resource and a too well kept secret. So at this point in time, it's my great pleasure to introduce you to our current president, Mrs. Eileen Coley. Mrs. Coley has been our president since the death of her mother, Eileen Garrett, in 1970, and it's since then that the Foundation has been under her very steady guidance and has continued to thrive. I must tell you that Mrs. Coley has just recently been in the throes of recovery from an emergency abdominal surgery just barely 2 weeks ago, and it's a mark of her allegiance to the field and of course to Parapsychology Foundation, but particularly a mark of her great respect and affection for our speaker, Dr. William Rowe, this evening that she's here. So, ladies and gentlemen, I give you Mrs. Eileen Coley.
Good evening. I'm very happy to welcome everyone here, to see you all here. And it's a pleasure also to welcome my old friend. I was just talking that it must be decades that Dr. William Rowe has been associated with the Foundation. He worked a great deal with Eileen Garrett, my mother. He's been to our conferences. He's been associated with so many aspects of parapsychology. And I think it's really rather great to start this series of perspectives with his help, because he has been active, as I mentioned before, literally decades in all phases of parapsychology. He's one of our finest researchers. And if anything has anything to say about parapsychology, I think it's William Rowe. So I'll pass you on to William Rowe.
Let's see, okay, all right. From the other end, excellent. Actually, I wear these all the time, so I'm very familiar with this kind of thing. Well, I'm very pleased indeed to be here. I really do consider myself a member of the family.
Just about.
In fact, the first scientific conference I went to, Parapsychology conference, was at Utrecht in 1954, I think it was. 50 what?
53.
53, really. Yeah, it's amazing so long ago. I'm not that old. I was actually only 10 when Eileen Garrett invited me. Yeah. And at that time I was a student at Oxford, England, And it was through Eileen Garrett that I was able to pursue my studies at Oxford in parapsychology. So I really owe a great deal to Eileen Garrett and to the foundation that she created. And it's always a joy for me to be here. Now, my interest in the field goes back even a few years beyond that. When I was living in Denmark, and really what started off was one night I had gone to sleep, and then I woke up for some reason. I got out of bed, and I wondered, why am I up? And I looked around the room, and I saw my body still in the bed. And it was a very startling experience, and in the beginning disconcerting, really a serious case of absent-mindedness. But as it persisted through the years, I became curious about it. Really, what was happening? Was that my sort of soul detaching? Or what was it? Now, if it was my soul, it was a very uninteresting kind of soul, because it was just like my everyday, ordinary self. It was just elsewhere from the body. It could also do things that the body couldn't quite do. I thought, well, is this something immaterial? Can I stick my hand through a wall? And so I did that, and the hand got sort of part way in, and then it felt really strange, because you really don't do that as a rule, I suppose. But anyhow, this continued over the years, and at the same time as I had these experiences, I began reading. A neighbor of mine was a Danish author, Jacob Paludan was his name, and he lent me books about parapsychology. In this way I learned that out-of-body experiences are not that rare, they're quite common. And he also lent me books about Eastern philosophy, Eastern religion. And one of them was the Bhagavad Gita. And in that book I learned that the real self, my real self, was not just this little self in the body or wandering around the house out of body, but something very vast that really included everything. The physical world, the mental world, the spiritual world. And it was also something that you could experience. Now, you had to go through some efforts, according to the Bhagavad Gita, to do that. More particularly, you had to meditate. And what that entailed was, that you sat down on the floor and you folded your legs into what's called the lotus position. And after I'd done that for a while, I had an extraordinary experience of excruciating pain in my knees. And that's really as far as I got. But there was always this promise of a wider realm, a wider perspective, a wider horizon that continued to nag me through the years. So my father was Norwegian American. He lived in Oakland, California, and when it was time to go to the university, well, Berkeley was the obvious place. So I went to Berkeley to study out-of-body experiences and this big mind that I had been promised. Now, at Berkeley, they had a deep and abiding interest in the psychology department, deep interest in white rats. But the issue as to whether white rats had out-of-body experiences really never came up at all. But now, in the meantime, these out-of-body experiences continued. One afternoon, I took a nap. I woke up, it had gotten dark. I went over to turn on the light, and I saw my finger go through the switch, and then my body on the bed. So what is this? Some sort of illusion, or is this my real soul? And why is it such a kind of boring soul? Well, anyhow, Then I read about a British parapsychologist, philosopher, H.H. Price, who was at Oxford, and went to Oxford to study under him, and in that way started doing parapsychological experimentation, got into the field of parapsychology. Then later on, Dr. Ryan, who was at Duke, invited me there, and people in parapsychology at that time and still are focusing on parapsychological experiments that are evaluated statistically. In other words, you do a series of experiments in telepathy or clairvoyance or whatever. Somebody's looking at some cards in another room or at a picture in another room, and that's sort of what you do. You try to guess or get an image of that picture, and then 4 or 5 days later, or more likely 5 or 6 weeks later, you find out whether or not you have ESP, whether anything happens. And that's somehow or other never was really exciting enough, never was quite satisfactory enough to me. Hi, Vicky. But then in Long Island, there was a case of flying objects. Objects were flying around the house. The police called Dr. Ryan for help in figuring out what was happening, and he sent Dr. Pratt, myself, to Seaford to make an investigation of this house of flying objects. And so my exploration into so-called poltergeist phenomena began. I think the best introduction to this would be to show a clip from Unsolved Mysteries of one of the cases I was involved with. It's obviously a sort of a dramatic reconstruction of it, but it's quite close to the facts. If anything, the facts are more interesting than what you see on this. But this will sort of give you an idea of the kind of situation you are in when you investigate poltergeist or what we now call RSPK phenomena. So if we can see that. Tina to North Carolina, and we continued the work in parapsychology laboratory there. And when we were working with her, objects moved in different parts of the place. And here we are in a situation other than a home, where there's no possibility that she or anyone else could have installed magical devices or anything. So we definitely seem to be dealing with genuine PK phenomena, what parapsychologists refer to as cases of psychokinesis, mind over matter. The phenomena are very mysterious, but in some ways they kind of conform to known patterns. For instance, the occurrences will fall off, will decrease with increased distance from the central person. There are other things that has given us a clue, or we think may indicate what kind of energy we may be dealing with, perhaps. One is that poltergeist occurrences tend to erupt when the Earth's magnetic field is disturbed. There's an increase in the Earth's magnetic field as a result of sunspots and various things like that. That's measurable, and that people record in various places of the planet. And when these occurrences begin, there is a tendency for the Earth's magnetic field to be disturbed. So could it be that these people somehow or other modulate electromagnetic energy, sort of collect electromagnetic energy, and then somehow or other affect the environment? You know, as I look around this room and as you look around, electromagnetic energy is reflected back from all these objects in very characteristic ways, and in that's the way we navigate through the world. Well, could it be that we are dealing with... This was not a poltergeist occurrence. I'm sorry. I better stay a little closer to the thing. Well, that's the question. That was a question. Let's see here now. There's another kind of occurrence. Oh yes, let me mention. First of all, these poltergeist cases, poltergeist occurrences, are rare. They're quite rare. This case erupted in 1984, and it's the. I've been in other cases, but this is the last genuine or convincing case I was involved with. So they are rare. Now there's another type of occurrence that's not at all rare, and that's so-called hauntings. Haunting occurrences. And they're quite different from poltergeist occurrences. Poltergeist occurrences are diurnal. They happen when the person is awake and present. In hauntings, the phenomena tend to occur at nighttime. There are movements of objects, but they're spread out in time. They're rare. If you get to a poltergeist case early enough, you are liable to be present when things are happening, as I was, and several colleagues were, in the case of Tina Resch. So if you want to study psychic phenomena, strong psychic phenomena, poltergeist occurrences is a good way to start. Now, hauntings are very interesting, however, because they suggest, well, first of all, there are frequent apparitional experiences. There are footsteps, sound suggestive of human presence. One of the experts in our in this realm of investigation, Dr. Mayer, is here with us. The lady in white in back, who has probably investigated more ghosts cases than anyone. But as I was saying, in these days we did not have instrumentation that I now always use in investigations of field phenomena. And the instrumentation that I use, and that Mickey has used also, are magnetometers that pick up magnetic fields, pick up strong magnetic fields. Now, a colleague of mine who's at the University of in Florida, in Gainesville, was recently on a poltergeist case, and he did bring a magnetometer, and he said that during these occurrences, the magnetometer went off scale. So there seemed to be a very strong magnetic field in that case, at least. Now, in the beginning of the Resch case, there was apparently also a strong magnetic field because of the Earth's of the geomagnetic disturbance. But whether there were any magnetic fields, very active magnetic fields, during during the period of the phenomena, we really don't know. So let me bring you to a case here that I think, that I think we explained reasonably well in understandable terms. So if you could show the other slide, the other video. It's also of we recorded increases in the magnetic field when we heard sounds, or rather, these was we stayed several nights in the house. My assistant, a graduate student at the University of West Georgia, was in the most active room. I was in the room that was not so active. I needed some sleep. And she woke up several times hearing banging noises and also feeling intense cold. She's a very hardy girl. She comes from Boston, and she usually doesn't sleep with many covers on, she says. but that night, at various times, she really needed to cover herself up. So there were these sharp drops in temperature, and then there was these increases in the magnetic field. Now, the interesting thing about these sounds is that, now I was sleeping in the room next to hers, and one of the brothers was sleeping in the room on the other side. You remember the room where the girls were sleeping, the two sisters were sleeping? On the wall where all these sounds were coming from, apparently, just on the other side, the brother was asleep. He was asleep during all of this ruckus. And similarly, when Lisa, my assistant, heard these sounds, I didn't hear anything. I was awake for most of this period of time, heard nothing. So these appear to be what's called electrophonic sounds. That is, they're heard and they are heard by a person. They're real sounds, but they're produced within the head. They are not objectively heard. They are the result of electric current going through the brain as a result of this increase in the magnetic field, apparently. Now, the house was located close to a fault zone, and they produce the magnetic fields. So the theory is that a mechanism was involved that Dr. Persinger, a Canadian neuroscientist, who I'm really indebted to for most of my observations, he hasn't discovered it. The Peltier effect is a well-known. It's a commercial means of refrigeration. It's used instead of Freon. So the process is quite well known, and it happens in nature under certain geological conditions. Now, let me add something else. The reason we were called in on this case was not because of the sounds, because they could live through that, but what had happened was that 3 of the dogs had died. Now, these were hunting guides, so they earned their livelihood by taking people hunting. And in that activity, hunting dogs was a requirement. And so they had these dogs. They were also personal pets. And 2 of these dogs just sort of keeled over, died for unknown reasons. Apparently, possible heart attack, possible epilepsy. It was unknown what the cause was. The 3rd dog they found hung on the fence one morning. It had a long lead, and their theory was, that the ghost had grabbed it and hung it there. What evidently had happened was that the dog had jumped back and forth across the fence and then finally got caught and hung itself. So what caused these disturbances among the dogs? Well, one of the things that these magnetic fields, one of the effects is that they produce ultrasound, high-frequency sound, that is not heard by humans. It's used for dog whistles. You can call a dog, you can't hear it. And it's very noxious. It's very dangerous for animals. Actually, living in fields like that is dangerous for anyone. Not because it's a ghost, but because of these strong magnetic fields can interfere with the brain. So of course, this was a show by Unsolved Mysteries, and you can't have a show where you solve the mystery, so they, rather dismissed my theory. But the family was, understood what was said and were appreciated. It seems that they weren't dealing with, they weren't possessed. The house was not possessed. They were not dealing with demons. So in my opinion, and I know that Mickey doesn't agree, but in my opinion, we seem to be dealing with magnetic fields, magnetic energies. So does this mean, let me see, I have to be a little careful about time now. Does this mean that poltergeist occurrences, this macro PK and hauntings are sort of, if this speculation is in the right direction, is just magnetic fields, just parts of the invisible spectrum, And what exactly in terms... Now you see, in RSPK occurrences, the phenomena are meaningful. In other words, the disturbances reflect what's going on in the mind of the individual. Tina was a very angry and unhappy girl, and very angry at her parents, at her foster parents. She had been abandoned by her biological mother when she was 10 months old, got into a home where the focus was on the foster children. Not the least because the foster children, or always one of the foster children, had some severe neurological problems, some severe damage. So Mrs. Resch had a lot on her hands and could not really respond to Tina all the time. So the way Tina got attention was by cutting up, by being bad, as it were. And so she was living under a lot of pressure. And when you look at the objects that were disturbed, her mother's picture, the turmoil in the home, the ready explanation is that this destruction was a reflection of her anger, of her unhappiness. So it wasn't a sort of a blind force. The force was a very seeing force, and it picked out significant objects. Now, when I came to the home, to be able to do anything, I had to be present when things happened. So it was very important for me that there should be something that I could validate as genuine. And Tina, needing attention as she did, was very appreciative of my interest in her. And so, to me, it seemed as if this was her response. This was the way she sort of non-verbally, in a kind of body English, if you will, responded to my concern about her. Also, when the electrician was there, by the way, these electrical disturbances continued for hours. He walked around the house for a couple of hours, actually, he told me, turning off switches that had just turned on, putting scotch tape on, going to the next switch, turning the light off, putting scotch tape on, Tina right next to him, and the moment he left the first switch, the light went on and the tape disappeared. He told me he made 6 rounds on the lower part of the house doing that. And he was, at that stage, he was fascinated. He just loved this. What was it? In the beginning, he was scared, the unknown, but then it became interesting. And Tina, again, liked the attention. So she kept, in a way, she kept him there by producing this show for him, which was an electric show, basically, a light show. So we are dealing with a meaningful expression of this energy. It's a meaningful expression. Let me quote you something here that I find of interest. I have difficulties with things like this. I don't have any pockets now. These things are so fancy, you can't, the pockets are closed up. Well, now here's a psychic that I have that I know personally. This psychic spoke about a field surrounding all material objects. She called this a surround. I penetrate these levels through the direction of mind, these levels of the surround, and the control of breath. I do so with the accompaniment of a swiftly vibrating magnetic field. The form of this field, invisible to normal sight, is a body which accompanies the functioning of superconsciousness in man. In other words, our superconsciousness, according to this image, consists of a magnetic field. But it's a field of consciousness at the same time. That's the interesting thing about this. Breathing is her way of... The medium I'm talking about here, I'm quoting from, is Eileen Garrett, who founded this place, as some of you will have recognized. The conscious act of breathing brings forth imagery in a language in which nature speaks to us. Above and beyond the thought that produces imagery, countless nerve cells work to produce the thought. In other words, the miracle of the conscious breath is a miracle of creation. From this relaxed, non-thoughtful perception comes unification with external knowledge and that which we perceive as mind, a magnetic field. There were a couple of others. One other quotation here which I think is very interesting. She said, "New precision instruments will soon be built to register man's own radiation and his relationship to other types of energy in the universe. These will have to be more delicate than any yet constructed in order to catch the swiftly moving emanations radiating from the body, as well as the brain of man. Eventually man will begin to discover that his own body has within and without it the answer to the meaning of his existence on this earth and to the riddle of all these other states of consciousness which baffle him today." In other words, we affect each other by affecting the magnetic fields or the surrounds that surround us, according to Garrett. Now, Garrett's image here, this is from her first book in 1939, that's a good many years ago, has been realized in recent years by Michael Persinger at Laurentian University in Canada, where he can evoke distinct mental states, including out-of-body experiences, things like that, by different pulses of magnetic energy that he sends into a person's brain. So the image I would kind of like to leave with you is that what seems physical, what seems material, yes, is indeed physical and is material, but at the same time it may be mental, it may be psychic, it may be spiritual. Consciousness, in other words, in that expression, energy is consciousness, consciousness is energy. Now I came to this idea a few weeks ago, and I thought it was rather clever. And then I got a book written by William Tiller and published, just came out this year. He's a physicist at Berkeley, and he said the same, that consciousness is energy, energy is consciousness. This is one of these unfortunate cases that you sometimes come across of what's called precognitive plagiarism. But on the other hand, I sort of felt a little better because this idea was sort of backed up by a physicist. And then we have these insights of Garrett. When I first read her book, she was talking about magnetic fields. I think about this. She doesn't know much about science. It's a metaphor. It's kind of nice, but but it turns out to be what I think is the case. That these fields may represent consciousness, so that when we engage or when we change mental states of consciousness, we may interact with physical nature that is at the same time psychic and spiritual nature. So it's a new way of looking at the universe, or rather it's a very old way of looking at the universe. It's what the Bhagavad Gita told me many, many years ago, has told us, all of us, a long time ago, that the physical universe, material universe, is at the same time a mental universe, a human universe, a universe of consciousness, and that we ought to treat it that way. Thank you. So let's see if you have some questions. Try not to argue with me because I become nervous.
Well, how have you come to view the fact that you saw yourself in bed?
Well, the last, I didn't tell you about the last out-of-body experience I had. I woke up one night, I was at Duke then, I worked at Duke, I woke up one night in one of the clearest out-of-body experiences I'd had. I went down to my living room, which is a room about this size, with windows like that, out to the back. And as I was standing in the doorway is more or less there, and surveying this room, I was excited about having such a clear out-of-body experience, and at the same time frustrated because again I couldn't tell whether this was my imagination or whether it was for real. Is this a physical room I was looking at? I mean, it must be, I thought. And then I saw moonlight was streaming down through the windows and casting shadows on the floor. And in one place there was a rug on the floor, like that, and there was a shadow from a little round table we had around the corner of the rug, cast by the moonlight. And I told myself, well, I couldn't know that shadow would be there at this time. So now I'm able to sort of test this. And so I went down on hands and knees in my out-of-body form and measured this shadow on the two sides. It was more or less a palm's width. It extends a palm's width outside this rug. And as I put my hand on the floor, I could feel the wooden grains in the hand. It was really curious. I mean, so real. So anyhow, with this precious knowledge, I hurried back in bed, plunged back, in my body. My wife was lying next to me. I briefly wondered if I hit the wrong body, what was going to happen then. But anyhow, I got myself up, went back to the sitting room to see this shadow, and the room was pitch black. There was no moonlight that night. I mean, I should have figured that out before I went to sleep. And there's no way in which this shadow could have been produced. Even then I thought, well, maybe it was displaced in time. So I saw a shadow of another night. But no, it couldn't be produced in any way, except if you made some very special arrangement, you could probably produce it. But under no conditions of natural light or artificial light could this shadow be produced. So it seemed to me that I had created a hallucination of my own making. Now, at the same time, because of my interest and because because the foundation I worked for was concerned with the question of life after death, the Psychical Research Foundation, we were doing studies of people's out-of-body experiences. And the best of these subjects, when they went to another room in the out-of-body form and would see the targets we put up on the walls and so forth, basically, they were no better than chance. Now, there were other studies where the results were highly significant, but in some of these experiments where the person was convinced he was in the other room, as convinced as I was that I was standing in front of this moon-dabbled floor, the reports were erroneous. So my feeling is that in out-of-body, you see, the language of ESP is memory, is imagination. It's your own memory, it's your own imagination that is called forth when you have a psychic impression. You don't get a picture from somebody else's mind. The stimulus comes from the other person, but then activates your memories. So that's what you experience. And sometimes all we see are our own illusions. Sometimes there's some ESP in there, some psychic awareness in there. That's how it seemed to work. Yes?
That's a question. I had an out-of-body experience when I was very young, and they say it's quite common to young children. And I remember leaving my body. I remember being very light, which really struck me as odd. I walked into the bedroom, and then I started to do some kind of ballet, but I was looking at myself in the mirror. Have you ever had people looking in the mirror to see if they could see a reflection back?
No, I don't think I have. Yeah, I don't know if any of you know of that.
And
Yeah.
well, so I saw it, and I said, "Oh, gee, I could do it really well."
Mhm.
And in real life, I was taking ballet lessons.
I see.
And then I decided, well, this is kind of silly.
Mhm.
Why am I doing this? And I heard a voice calling me, and then I went back, and I said, "Gee, here's my body in the bed." And then I went back into
Mhm.
my body, but. That just occurred to me now. If you ever had your, people, your subjects actually look in the mirror
Mhm.
to see how they see themselves
And you saw yourself in the usual way.
in the usual
Yeah.
way.
Well, to a large extent, this out-of-body experience conforms to your expectations. My co-author of this book, Psychic Connections, which we're all getting tonight. By the way, Christmas is quite near, had an out-of-body experience and was floating along the streets, and then the light turned red and she stopped. She couldn't move further in her out-of-body form. She couldn't go through this red light. Well, because you're not supposed to go through a red light. So our memories and expectations color our excursions, however we regard them. Yes, please.
How do you, what about the out-of-body experiences associated with near-death experiences, where people come back and talk about the things that they saw that they never saw before?
Yeah.
And that there wasn't any, it wasn't possible for them to imagine, well, I suppose they could imagine it, but in fact that there's a fair amount of accuracy.
Oh yes, in a number, now also in the studies we did at Duke, in a number of these tests, the persons were accurate. And indeed, in many out-of-body experiences, people are accurate, and are accurate beyond reasoning and beyond sensory input. So there is a psychic component to many out-of-body experiences, but it's not invariable. And even people who are adepts at out-of-body travel are often mistaken. Robert Monroe, who is a sort of star subject in a way, many of you may have read his books on out-of-body travel. Robert Monroe, well, Charlie Todd did several experiments with him and sent Monroe to various target locations, and he always came back with the wrong information. So my feeling is that what we experience in this out-of-body travel is the same we experience in our dreams, that is, ourself, basically. But sometimes memories are evoked, images are evoked that reflect a distant situation, so that there is ESP. Typically, out-of-body experiences occur in relaxed conditions. Now they're associated with trauma very often, near-death experiences, but it comes at a time when the person's sort of given up. And at that time, that sort of coincides with being up at the ceiling and looking down, and then perhaps going out in the hospital corridor and seeing friends gathered out there, seeing the instrumentation and so forth, and various things that you couldn't know normally. So there is genuine psychic perception, but not invariable. If you have an out-of-body experience, it doesn't mean that you have been in that at that point of the real quote-unquote world. Yes, please. Yes.
I have to ask you about the Scotch tape.
Yes.
I quite understand things well as one can, moving across rooms and going through refrigerators. Dematerializing? Now, am I just not, it just never found again, or it's under the sofa? I mean, that seems an entirely different category of event, actually.
That's right. They looked for it everywhere. And there was just on one occasion there was a bit of Scotch tape that is sort of hanging on the switch, by the switch. But in all the other instances, this electrician told me, it's just gone.
And is that a different kind of event from the I mean, we're not talking about physical objects.
Well, there are some very, very curious things that happen in this realm. There are also, in many of these situations, objects move into closed space or move out of closed space. Now, allegedly here, Tina had put these eggs in the refrigerator. And now the mother was sure that she put them in the refrigerator. Tina herself said that she was looking at the refrigerator when the egg came out, and she did like this. So if we're dealing with a situation like that, it's suggestive of something like movements in the fourth dimension. I mean, the fourth dimension is not that mysterious because each of us right now experience a bit of the fourth dimension, because we can't have an experience unless it's stretched out a bit in time. It's not stretched out very much. The interesting thing is, for things to be real, like this, it's actually time that gives the reality. It's time that gives the three-dimension reality, because only then can you decide, well, it's for real. It has to exist for at least a fraction of a second. So in the psychic space, this window perhaps is stretched out. So you don't. So there's a greater room for play. But it's But again, what the mechanism is. Who knows? Yeah. Please.
Yeah, I was intrigued when you suggested that maybe Tina or other poltergeist agents are somehow tapping into electromagnetic energy, somehow modulating that energy.
Yes. Yeah.
But wouldn't that mean then that objects that are affected by this energy should be magnetic or ferrous?
That's a very good point.
Not magazines and Scotch tape.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Now, when objects, I have looked at the composition of these kind of objects, and it's just as likely to be dielectrics like cups and glasses as knives and forks. So the energy that is propelling objects seems to be mechanical or kinetic energy. Kinetic energy. Now, kinetic energy is. No, I don't think so. Kinetic energy is produced mechanically. Now, for instance, this is kinetic energy talking. You affect elastic medium. Not a person, but air. You affect air. So hearing involves kinetic energy. Moving object involves kinetic energy. Now, electromagnetic energy can be converted to kinetic energy. For instance, if you have a loudspeaker, as used in radios, that vibrates. The vibrations are induced by electromagnetic energy, but the vibration is kinetic. If you put a dice there, you'll see this dice jumping up and down. So that something like that would presumably be the mechanism involved. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And when you said about the window of time in the fourth dimension, wouldn't that be, if the Scotch tape had somehow been displaced in time, wouldn't they have found it, a couple of weeks later and swept it up off the floor?
Yeah. I don't know. I just don't know. It was never found anyhow. Yeah. Of course, there may not be much Scotch tape on the other side. I mean, it may.
How convinced are you that Tina couldn't have been doing these things? I mean, you have the report of the electrician, but how good an observer was he? I mean, was it possible that he would go into one room and Tina would whip it off and turn the switch? I mean, is it possible?
In these cases, it's just testimony from another person.
Well, sometimes the conditions are better to observe.
So, but when we brought her to Spring Lake in Chapel Hill, where the phenomena occurred in a place that was not Tina's own space, and where there were three of us observing, Steve Bauman, myself, and Jeannie Legel. There was no doubt but that these things occurred. They really took place, and sometimes there was movement. Interesting. You have a lot of these poltergeists in New York City.
Was she accompanied there by any family member?
No, she was alone.
Did you film it?
I tried to film it in Columbus, set up a camera several times, and the phenomena happened around but not in camera view. So I brought a camera in and focused it on a table where we had target objects, and concealed the camera in a piece of laboratory equipment. It was very cleverly concealed, and expect to use it. But my colleague who was in charge of the laboratory said, no, we can't do that. That's unethical. And I hit him. I had to. But, it was of no effect. So that still needs to be...
keep her from knowing that the camera was...
Exactly, yeah. To me, it was the most ethical thing that could be done, because it would have been shown the world that this was for real, and it would have cleared her of causing these things fraudulently. So I was just up in December. I was in Portland, Oregon, and installed a video equipment, concealed video equipment. Things were happening around a 10-year-old girl with all the sort of seeming characteristics of the poltergeist agent. Heavy pieces of furniture were flipped over. Big tables, more or less made of rock, flipped over. And we were dealing with it turned out, I was watching her in the closed circuit, dealing with a very strong and very fast little girl. Yeah. So very strong, yeah. But that's what it was, unfortunately. But that's what needs to be done. Yeah. Yes.
If this is all geo-electromagnetic influxes and energy, like you were talking about the haunted ranch, what can be done to help these people so that they can move back into their place, or to help Tina? This is obviously might be interesting for us as parapsychologists, yes, but for the individual, it's not so very interesting.
Yeah. Well, throughout my work with Tina, I always had a psychotherapist along to counsel her and also her family, and to try to help her understand what was going on from a psychological perspective, and that really is needed in this type of work. It's a sort of it's sort of scientific. I mean, it's an attempt to figure out what's happening, but also you're dealing with people and you have to do that. I mean, now. Now the thing about poltergeist occurrences is that they eventually die down. After a couple of months, they die down as unexpectedly as they started up. You don't know really what brought them to the end. Just they stop. In hauntings go on for years and years and years. And of course, it helps the family to know that there is a physical explanation for this, but it doesn't make the phenomena go away. Now I understand that there are ways of what's called degaussing a place. You can put up equipment that sort of saps the magnetic field. And that's an area that we need to go into, but that I don't have the capacity, which I don't have the capacity to do at this time. It basically is an engineering issue, really, and it's solvable, as I believe. I'm told it's solvable. Yes.
I've experienced that the TV goes on and off unexpectedly. I was wondering if it's part of that phenomenon, or just the cable was wrong or something. It is common. My TV goes on and off.
I see. Anything else in your house?
Noise.
I see.
And probably I see some people.
Yes, I see. Well, in a case that Mickey and I were on, these occurrences seem to be associated with magnetic fields in the house due to house currents. In this case, they seem to come from the ground. In other cases, they can come from electrical installations in the house. And you are also more liable to experience these kinds of things if you are a sort of psychic personality, if you have a sensitive brain, sensitive temporal lobes. So these two things together, a sort of psychic sensitivity, brain sensitivity, plus magnetic fields in the area. So keep account if you make a record of when they happen. Now, if they're due to natural conditions, they tend to occur between the hours of 2 and 4 a.m. Because the tidal forces are strong at that time, and also there's a hormone that's hospitalized. This case was a sort of bad place, I believe, and in situations like that, you really need to either get out of the place or degauss the place, get rid of this magnetic field, because it messes up with your brain.
Who can I ask?
Well, Mickey works with a magnetometer. Are you here in the city?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. She would come out and take magnetic readings. Now she may conclude that's that there's something else, that there might be some entity of presence, and in that case she can take it home with her to her apartment. But anyhow, she's a local expert.
I'm sorry, with the second case in the Cowboys, when the sisters came, and they both heard it.
Yes.
Did you say earlier that you thought it was a magnet? Electricity phonic hearing. It's a sound that you hear, and two people may hear it, and a third person may not hear it. Or one person out of three, or everybody may hear it. But now we had a tape recorder going through this, voice-activated, a sound-activated tape recorder. It picked up nothing, while Lisa heard these big bangs. Also, the conversations are typical. You will hear. She also heard a conversation, and you typically hear the voices. They may be quite loud, but you can't make out what they're saying. That's typical for these things. Electrophonic sounds are often heard by deaf people. I was investigating another case in an old plantation house in Maryland, and a lady there who could only hear with a hearing aid and had to use a hearing aid in conversation. Well, at night time, when the hearing aid was off, she heard these ghostly voices and heard knockings at the door, which I expect were electrophonic. So, but whatever, of course, we've been educated to regard in our culture, to make a sharp division between mind and matter. Electromagnetic energy is, well, that's matter. This is matter, mind, well, maybe mind exists, maybe consciousness exists, but it probably is only a sort of reflection of the matter in our brain. Well, if we switch our perspective and if we're open to the possibility that the physical environment is also a psychic and a spiritual environment, things change. I mean, a lot of things change. And we are liable to be more open to these effects. We're more liable to be more open, more hospitable to psychic influences, perhaps. And certainly we are likely to be more respectful of each other and of our physical environment, because essentially it's part of ourself. And it's part of ourself that we may be able to experience, assuming, of course, that we can get our legs into the lotus position. So. Now, if there's some other questions?
I have one. I mean, I had a house in the country in Pennsylvania that was very old, from the 1850s, and we would sit out on the porch at night, an upstairs porch, and there was a creek across the street, across the road, and it was out in the country. And there would be 5 or 6 people sitting in on this upstairs porch, and I would sound like 6 or 8 women walking down the road, and at night, they couldn't possibly be there. And I would look around to see if anybody on this. I've never told anybody this before, and I just, I would just hear them coming as if they were, going to walk right up to the front door of my house, and they would never arrive, and no one else on the porch heard this but me. And from what I'm understanding you to say, is perhaps it had something to do with the ripples of the stream or something, or the magnetic sound waves or something. But I heard it often and very clearly.
That's interesting, yeah. Now,
no one else.
Yeah. Well, streams often run along magnetic fault zones. So there are also places up there. I don't know if was that coal mining area or.
They would for stone quarrying.
So that creates disturbances. The rocks shift and so on, and that may create piezoelectric. That may create electricity within the rocks that can move around, and that may result in increased magnetic field activity.
Lots of other things like that happened, but I just sort of swallowed it and moved on.
Well, animals, when you're in an investigation of a haunted house and you see a dog dish, you say, you have a dog, and does your dog behave strangely? Yes, how did you know? Yeah. So that's almost invariable in haunted houses. If you're dogs and cats, they're going to behave either in an attacking way or in a greeting way, or be disturbed in some way or another. You also see that before earthquakes, the same process. Yes?
Years ago, I had a good friend who was a writer, and he wrote a bestseller, not having to do with hauntings, but I think it was called The Devil's Triangle. And I've had many, many experiences, many, many years, but I wasn't at this end of it. I was more in New Age realm with spirituality. So he invited me over to his house one day, and he said, I've got a haunting. He said, oh, yeah, that's probably because you're writing a book and you want to fabricate something like this and you want to impress me. Sure enough, we're sitting there, and he says, do you hear it? I looked at him, he looked at me, exactly the same timing, footsteps, pacing back and forth in the attic. But purposefully, not something as though it was a vibration. But, I can discern the difference between a real haunting. It was purposely. And then one time, I heard just crash of glass like right in the next room. Well, you go in the next room, there's nothing there.
Yeah,
There's no mirror.
That's typical for hauntings.
Crash.
Yeah, yeah.
Right down.
Yeah.
I was just
Yeah.
flabbergasted.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had other, I have
Yeah.
other abilities, but not
Yeah.
something as definitive.
Oh, yes.
And I couldn't, and what really got me is that it was almost like a form of intelligence
Yeah.
wanting to make me aware,
Yes.
as well as him,
Yes.
and both of us together, that this actually occurred.
Yes.
And to make the distinction between one and, say, something
Yeah,
else.
yeah. Well, there may be entities wandering around.
It's kind of silly,
Yeah.
like I always question these things and why,
Yeah.
and what am I really learning from that
Yes.
particular type of experience? Because I'm not into poltergeist
Yeah.
per se.
Well, the thing is, the brain tries to make sense of whatever occurs. So it interprets things. It interprets, that's what neuropsychologists tell us. It interprets electrical discharges the closest way it knows how. That's footsteps. Yeah, that's people talking. That's somebody whistling. But the stimulus may not be quite like that. Again, there may be intention behind the stimulus. Yeah, there may be. Yeah. But then again, also in these situations, when there are magnetic fields, one effect of these is to sense a strong a sense of presence. If, for instance, if Dr. Persinger directs his pulse at your brain, you will feel there's somebody standing behind you. And that's very typical of hauntings also. But again, if there's a sense of intention, well, let's respond to the intention.
The tempo changed
Yes.
in the course of the pacing back and
Yeah.
forth. With like hesitancy at one point, angry the next point.
Yeah.
Different types of moods. Maybe I could just sense it.
Yeah.
But it was just definitely there.
Yeah. Well, that's what you often hear in these situations.
My grandfather used to say, he always had hauntings where he could hear chains moving, and then one day, he did see an apparition walk out of the house on some kind of a plank, with chains and just going on and doing its business or whatever.
Yeah.
For sure. Well, picture me with a grandmother of Eileen Garrett, and there was more than chains going off in the night. I think at this point we're going to let Dr. Roll have a deserved rest, and I think we should all give him our thanks for a very good presentation. Wonderful. He will be available to sign copies of his book. They're here, Psychic Connections and Body, Mind, Spirit. They're at a cost of $12.95, so he'll be able to sign them for you. Thank you very much for coming, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Hi there. I hope you enjoyed today's selection. My name is Lisette Coley, and I serve as president of Parapsychology Foundation. I hope you give us a like, and if you have a comment, then do so below, and we'll try and better serve you. Any suggestions are welcome. And we want to thank very much our loyal subscribers. This is a relatively new channel and a new venture for Parapsychology Foundation, so we very much appreciate your loyalty. And if you haven't decided to subscribe, maybe pretty please you could.